Good morning, friends. I'm going to get us started and really just going to get our logistics going this morning. You can see that this is a logistically dependent session since we have folks gathering. We're thinking in groups of 4 or 5 would be good. So as people come in, if they can fill into those slots, I think we'll have our Adult Ed and Justice and Reconciliation Ministry folks do that. Welcome, everyone. This is our 3rd session that Justice and Reconciliation Ministry is leading. And first week, Dee Dee and Pat really set a framework for us of, as a congregation, engaging with issues of race and racism, not as just a problem that is there with a few people, maybe we would even say a few bad people, but issues that we're all a part of, that we're all complicit in some ways, that we all have a role in addressing, that anti-racism and racial justice both names the systemic issues and then looks as a community, as people together, how we can engage with and be part of the transformation that brings racial justice. Last week, Matt Jansen and I introduced a draft of anti-racism racial justice commitment from Hope Church, and everyone should have a copy of that along with the response sheet with some questions. Those are at the tables there if anybody needs those, and a pen. That's what we'll be working with further today. And Matt and I really tried to give some context for that. This is building on work from General Synod this past last year, last summer. That was a big step for the RCA, saying for its assemblies, for the work of the RCA to make a commitment to anti-racism, to racial justice. And then we have sought to make that our own, and so looked at some of the reasons we stated it the way that we have drafted that here. And also the feedback we had gotten that it really helps to have, along with that, an implementation plan, something that says, that we would see as a living document that says, here is some of what we are doing, here's what we could do, and let's, as a community, continue to develop that together to put flesh on what a commitment like this would be. So that's what the session today really continues, to get some of your feedback on that, what resonates with you, what questions you have, and as you look at the implementation plan, how that speaks to you, questions you have about that, things that you would want to also consider having being a part of that. All right, so that's our work today, and you're going to do that in small groups, and then we're going to report back some of our discussion. So a couple things about that. We want to be aware that for some folks with hearing challenges, that being in a context like this with a lot of people talking can be especially difficult. So Ruth Stegman, our esteemed Justice and Reconciliation Ministry Chair, she's going to be taking a group who would like to go to the conference room so that you can have a quieter space without the background noise. Are there folks who are thinking they would like to do that, who would like to be in a group with Ruth? Anyone? You all right? Okay. You decide to take us up on that, Ruth will be still be available for that. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about group dynamics. You're going to be going through these questions. I'm going to give you a little bit of a time guide for it. We're going to start about 10:02 or so. You have an initial sort of get engaged with your feelings question, and then you have about 10 to 12 minutes for the questions 2 and 3. And I will be your timekeeper for that, let you know when it's time to do some transition 2. You need a scribe, someone to take notes in the group, all right? You need maybe a facilitator who's going to guide you through, and you need someone who's willing to report back to the group afterwards, all right? Probably not one person being all those things, but you're going to have to figure out those roles. And having some notes would be great that would be legible, so that you could hand those in afterwards, and JRM could put those and keep those as part of the input and guidance that we have moving forward. All right, so you need to do that together as a group. And then let's think a little bit about guidelines for speaking. Things like when you speak, maybe make 1 point and then stop. Don't do a 3-point sermon, just do 1 point, and then see what others may have to say. It's a good guideline. I've heard there's people who might want to make a lot of points. I don't know how that could ever be, but listen is good. Don't just be ready to say what's next, but listen to what others are doing. And I think we're going to model that even at the beginning of the 2 questions that you do, whoever your facilitator is in your group, maybe to just think quietly for a moment first before you dive in. Just gather each of your thoughts so that each of you has a chance to do that. All right, so those are just some good communication guidelines. Jill?
Just the part about thinking behind it. Can you share that?
I'm here. Come on up here.
Okay, sorry.
Thanks.
Just one of the other guidelines the group had come up with is when you share an idea, something that's important to you, if you would say something about what your thinking behind that is. Because often those values sit behind the thing you might say. So to say what's important to you and essentially why it's important to you. Okay.
Good. Thanks, Jill. All right, so do we have what you need? You got a copy of the draft statement and the implementation plan. You've got your response things. You need to be able to write on there a little bit, scribble a bit. I know it's not the easiest. Does everybody have pens who needs them? There's a basket there. Could walk around with that too. All right, so we're doing good. It's about 10:02, so you can dive in with that initial piece, and then I'll let you know a little bit after the top of the hour or so to make a shift.
You lost one.
Just for you to know that initial question 1 is meant to be just sort of a mixer to get you started, and then you take more time with questions 2 and 3.
Are you happy with that? Okay.
Just away from.
Can you hear enough?
like to start with this.
Sure. Okay. So when you look at the anti-racism statement, what one word would you use to describe your feelings? For example, enthused, hopeful, anxious, frustrated. We all need to choose one word, and we have 1 minute to go around and and do this. So do we all know each other's names? We do, right? Kevin, Mary, Bob, Patty, and Pat. I met you at Juneteenth. Yeah, okay. Yeah, right. So do you want to start?
Sure.
Okay.
You want to pass the mic?
Yes. Good idea. Thank you.
Well, I zeroed right in on hopeful. It was right in front of me, and I kind of like that word anyway. And it was something that I didn't really have on my radar very much. But when I read through this a couple of weeks ago, I was hopeful that we were going in the right direction.
I guess I would say the same thing. Yeah. Hopeful.
A different word that I would use would be this feels like an enormously timely challenge. Timely in the sense that it's about time that we become more mindful of issues of systemic racism and the way in which the church historically and churches historically have been part of systemic racism. And I think my presumption is that we as a congregation may find that this is more challenging to do than we anticipate, that this will at times stretch us into places of discomfort, embarrassment, confusion. So I think the word challenge comes to mind because I think this is going to entail a lot of work. But I'm prepared to work.
Well, I would say that I'm enthused about it. I think it's wonderful that we're planning to make a statement, and since I haven't been here for 2 weeks, I haven't heard the whole process, but also hopeful.
And I think I would combine this and say, hopefully challenged, or challenged hopefully, or right, exactly, because I think it's going to be a challenge too. But the more I listen to people talk from our congregation, the more hopeful I feel. Yeah, so good. Okay, we did that. Let's think about this next question. What's important to you about Hope Church making an anti-racist commitment as a congregation? What concerns do you have? And we've been asked to think about it a minute before we start talking, recognizing that there are two questions there. Okay, so there are two questions, and we need to be brief because we don't have a lot of time, right? So let's take just a minute to think about what's important. Do we think we're ready? We're boring the people online. Okay, Kevin, I'm handing it to you.
Sure, I can start. I think I'd answer the first question. What is important to me is that we're actually taking the courage to address this topic at this time. Much like you said, Bob, it's on people's minds, it's in the news, it's present before us. And so, as a community of faith here at Hope Church, we're actually taking the courage to discern this and do something about racism within our church community. And then, what concerns do I have? I think coming out of it, will it be just an action statement we'll put on on a piece of paper and then not do anything about it? Like, are there any actions, or accountability that comes out of it? Because it's a hard topic to tackle. I guess on a side note, I'm somewhat optimistic because we're talking more about being allies with other groups within our community of color. And that, to me, from what I'm starting to see, is something that feels right, and it's maybe something we can accomplish. So that's my input.
Well, to be honest, when we first started talking about this topic, I thought, well, we're already anti-racist, so, why do we need to do this? But then kind of look around and realize, it's not that simple. So.
My first reaction to this question was that this process of necessity is going to force us to become what I think we need to become, and that is confessional. If we are going to change, and I think this has to do with us individually as well as corporately, change only comes, if it's going to be constructive, if there is confession first. And in that context, I'm not sure if this is anticipating a different kind of contextual question, but when I was working through the draft statement this past week at home on my own, I was struck by the fact that in the second paragraph, the large one that begins, since its founding in 1862, midway in that paragraph it reads, "We confess that we have been complicit in perpetuating racial ethnic divisions among religious, cultural, economic, and political lines." And then it goes on about some other things. But what is noteworthy to me is that there is, understandably in some respects, in this
I don't know how linear you're being, but just have in mind that about another 12, 14 minutes, so that there is a third question also. Yeah, wait. Yeah, the first one was supposed to be like 2 minutes. We did that. To hear about various things. So that's the guidance.
Just to finish. Okay. What is striking to me is that we say in that statement, we confess that we have been complicit, but there is no example. There are no instances that are noted. And in some respects, that maybe is fine, because this may not be the document where that needs to occur. But that needs to occur sometime, somewhere, if there is going to be movement. And again, it has to do with the nature of confession. That if I say I'm sorry, but I don't say what I'm sorry about, then the I'm sorry really doesn't mean anything. Whether that's in a relationship setting or a corporate setting. So I anticipate that the challenge for us as a congregation will be learning to be self-examining, and honestly so, because that's when we then can see, oh, this is what we have or haven't done that maybe we need to correct, as opposed to, well, we know we've been problematic in the past, but we're not going to be problematic in the future, but without being clear about what that is, that's not going to happen.
Well, I believe that we need to stand up for what we believe in a written form and be public about it. My concern is I'm thinking about the pride flag, and that there would be backlash from some maybe white supremacists or something. And then also what we would do to follow up, and yeah, how can we put this in practice?
Okay. I've been on the committee, so I've been thinking about this a lot, and we've been tweaking it, and we've been listening to people in the congregation say, ooh, yeah, but what about this and what about that? Mostly members of the committee, but the ministers. I really like the fact that it gets beyond that kind of thinking of diversity that I think we've just got to move beyond. This is not a question, being anti-racist, of who's in our pew and how we're going to change our music. And those are all great questions to ask, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about being allies. And what's important to me is that we get beyond that question that we asked 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and start thinking about how can we help change laws? How can we help change communal practices? I mean, what does it mean to be a member of Hope Church and really care about this stuff? So that's what's important to me, but my concerns are that we're still part of our society, and our society is so unable to deal with different ways of thinking right now, and I don't know if we can get there. What if we're just like our society and we can't do it as a congregation? So, or maybe my concern is that the ministers will get there fine. They're forward thinking and they spend their time thinking about the Bible and what they should do as leaders, but the rest of us will be so lagging behind that they'll feel they're out there and the rest of us aren't with them. So those are my thoughts. We have another minute or two on this. We don't have to rush. Do we want to add on and have more conversation on this point?
What have we done that's public besides the Juneteenth? The Juneteenth having a table at church, a church table. Yeah.
I think we give money to I Am Academy, and we've been really supportive of various issues in town, haven't we? Oops, I'm sorry. Right? What do you know?
Well, what comes to mind is, I think as a community of faith, as a congregation, as Hope Church, we endorse Gordon and Jill and our staff to participate within the community. And I always felt good about that because they're my boots on the ground, honestly, where maybe I'm not as comfortable in those settings, or maybe I'm learning to be more comfortable, but at least I have a direct connection, I feel, to somebody out there advocating for these issues like race and reconciliation that I'm close to, and I can begin to learn and feel more comfortable about the topic in those settings. So to summarize, just the way the congregation has bought into the fact that, yep, we're putting our people out there on behalf of us, I think is important.
Can you add? Can you all?
What I resonated with was the word learn that you used about 30 seconds ago. My sense is that those of us who are not BIPOC people, those of us who are white, we oftentimes, if not most of the time, are not part of discussion that brings to our attention the issues of systemic racism that others experience and know in their bones. So part of what I would like to think that Hope Church can be about as a community of faith is intentional openness to learning, which then requires invitation to those who can teach. Because it seems to me that if we try to, in a sense, just instruct one another, that's a dead end in some respects, because if we ourselves have not been party to the impact of racism, we're not going to be able to speak to it in ways that illuminate. We need to be, as this statement suggests, intentional about inviting into our midst those who can speak about their own experiences and bring to us information that on our own we do not have access to. So part of what I think the anti-racism commitment needs to be about is that we are going to welcome opportunity to hear information that we can't share with each other, and then be open to it and learn from it, and then as God leads, begin to make decisions and choices that are appropriate to what we are learning from those who can teach us.
I was part of the discussion group on how to be an anti-racist, and I was so impressed with how many things I learned from that book about myself. And another book is I'm Still Here by Austin Channing Brown, I think. And that book was enlightening to me because I'd say to myself, oh, I haven't thought of that, you know.
You know, it might be good for us to get more practical. You'd mentioned that before. Well, you mentioned that in terms of examples. It might be good for us to get more practical about why we think that, how is this going to be so challenging for us? Why is this so hard? And where would we like to see ourselves put some energy? For instance, the city council stuff that's in the newspaper all the time, and our church leaders have been really good about attending and speaking about. Does that give us a direction? Is that what we need to tackle? Let me tell you just one thing that's in the back of my head that may or may not pertain. My family and I lived in Shaker Heights, Ohio for a while, which was such an unusual community. And I'm sure, even though I say it's unusual, I don't think it's the only one in our country that's done this. Back in the late 50s, early 60s, Shaker Heights as a community decided it wanted to become basically anti-racist. It wanted to be a community that thought about race in new ways. And that, ooh, man, we better let this little example go. Anyway, they got together and they talked about it long and hard with the entire community. I said we should move on, but basically what they did was they had Sunday night meetings, and they tried to make it of people of various races every night for the whole community to get involved before they moved on. And, you know, there have to be models out there about how we have more direct dialogue, not just the ministers. But let's move on, because suddenly they want us to get on to this. The Justice and Reconciliation Ministry has drafted an implementation plan for Hope Church to be allies to people of color in our community and to work for racial justice. Related to this plan, with what do you resonate? What questions do you have, and or ideas would you suggest to further the effort? You know, in a way, we're getting into this in this last little bit of our conversation. So let's just take 30 seconds to think and then keep going so that we can meet Gordon's timeline. All right?
How would we do that?
Do you want to start us? So it's the last two pages of that draft implementation plan, right?
That's what,
What would it look
that's what this
like?
is talking about?
What would it look like in that whole last page? So you want to, we really were getting into that. But go
Yeah.
ahead, Kevin. What do you think?
Well, I guess high level, and it's been a couple weeks since I've read through this, but again, what really resonated with me, and it was somewhat of a relief, I'll admit, was all around this idea of being allies to other groups within the community who maybe know more about this than we do, right? And maybe these other groups aren't expecting us to overnight change and become a fully integrated church or anything like that, but at least listen to them, take direction from them, learn from them. And I think that's a step I can do, and I think we can do as a congregation. I think the way our church operates, the structure of the church, the cadence of the worship services and things like that, people like. That's where they're here. And there's part of me, part of other people, I think they don't want to change that just to become an anti-racist congregation. And so does that put up a barrier or a wall when you've got those thoughts in the back of your mind? And I want to be more open-minded than that. Like, you know, how can we continue to do what we do and add to our church life where we are more accepting of others and others' backgrounds and others' races?
Nice.
How's that? have thoughts, Mary?
I don't have anything more to add either. I'm still processing this.
Since I haven't read
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so I love that list of things that are on the practical list, the draft implementation plan. What could we look like? But I think that's probably where we have to spend time as a group thinking and talking. I don't mean as this group, but as a church thinking about, okay, so what does it mean? That's going to make a difference. Like, for instance, the adult ed can offer a study of racial justice and anti-racism resources. I love that idea. I learned so much from some of our various speakers, but it tends to be a small group that goes and the same people that go. So that's not, we've got to find ways to branch out.
What about the small group?
The adult ed tends to be a smallish group, maybe 40 people. I mean, thinking back to Fred Johnson's, or thinking back to Chuck Green's, I thought their 2 adult eds were so helpful to this anti-racism thinking and what it means. But it tends to be the same people who go to our adult ed. And we've got to find a way to broaden that and somehow include more listeners and participants and voices. No, no, but I'm on the committee and I'll think about it.
To a certain extent, there's a part of me that says if you have 40 who are regular, is that, quote, a small group compared to the wider congregation? Mathematically, yes. Is it a significant number relative to the congregation? I think it's very significant. I think this particular collection of folks who regularly gather with intentionality to learn and explore is a very significant yeast, so to speak, in this congregation. And then it seems to maybe part of the challenge is how do we, who intentionally be yeast, impact the wider congregation? What are the ways in which we can kind of expand the influence that we have? So that would be, in a sense, the upside of the fact that we have a group of folks here who are extremely intentional. Having come from a small congregation that worshipped 100 on a Sunday in my parish, we were ecstatic.
All right, friends, I'm going to gather us back together.
And I
You can
don't
stay
think
in
that
your
was,
groups, but maybe just reshift a little bit back towards
I think
the front.
but that was a significant number of people.
Thank you all for being in conversation. We're going to share a little bit about some snippets of what you've talked about in your groups and then have some open conversation too. I realize we're not able to share everything you talked about in your groups, but I'm enough of a quantum physics small groups person that we've been interacting with each other across our groups as we've done this anyway. Even the fact that we've been in conversation together at the same time has informed us. So you want to hear more about that, I can teach you all about quantum physics. So, well, let's start we're going to do a little one piece from each group about those second and third questions, just a little snippet from each of you, and then each group, and then so you have to have your spokesperson ready for Judy and Bob to hand the microphone to. So as you engaged with the anti-racism, the racial justice statement, share one thought, perspective out of your group about that.
I'll get it started here. One person in our group mentioned having read recently Kristen Dumais' book called Jesus and John Wayne. It's a very effective response to Christian nationalism, which many of us see as a threat to anti-racism. And so maybe encourage maybe getting her to speak sometime. We could maybe get her in adult ed, maybe. We'll see.
Judy.
We've talked about this before, but this is
We
what...
can just keep going. We'll just go in order, Judy. Just bring it along there. Yep, thank you.
One of our comments was it's always important to have a spoken or a written goal that we can come back to.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Cindy reporting for our group. Two things. One is the structural aspect or response, organizing things, and to be aware of the potential for violence against Hope Church.
I thought we had a fascinating discussion around the question, are we shifting our attitudes away from anything towards something, or are we adding something on top of our already existing social justice commitments?
Yes, we are. Kind of mean that. No, we're on 2.
We're on 2. Wow, I had a long speech prepared for 1. Okay, just kidding. We came up with 2 number 1s for number 2, and one is we think that this is really, really, really important. It's good that we're discussing this. Our church has been a leader, and we may name some other churches that weren't leaders. Okay. The second number 1 was resources and personnel. If you add a focus or emphasis, as an activist, I always look and see, what does your budget say about the emphasis? If you're going to be adding meetings, adding travel, adding X, adding Y, where is that coming from in the budget? Or are we adding to the budget, or are we subtracting? Are we adding from the budget, or are we subtracting? Okay.
Thanks, Barbara. Yeah. Thank you. Who's the next group? Right here. Can be prepared. Yeah.
We thought it's important because having a concrete group acknowledgement is important. So if people come here, they know exactly the type of church you're getting involved with and whether or not they want to be a part of this church, and whether we care as much about this issue as they do. So just be very clear about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Peter. I won't respond yet. That group there, and then Bob, your group, right? Go ahead, Tom.
Our group was concerned with the statement being such a small step, and that we need to find ways to realize anti-racism in action in the multiracial community.
That's Tom.
And our group was excited, I think, about the courage that we're willing to take to get involved in the way that we want to be involved. And the question and the comment that this will force us to be more confessional. We're going to have to be more confessional as we move on with this.
Interesting word. Thank you. I think it helps just to get these out in the room, and then we'll have some time for some more comments and discussion. Let's look at that second one. The third one. I'm curious about some wonderings, input, questions, ideas about this draft implementation plan. And that was something that really coming out of the Great Consistory meeting that the Justice and Reconciliation Ministry heard, this needs to be a piece of it too, more as a living document. So what about some response to that from each group too?
Okay, I'll start it this time.
Good.
This group was really pleased to see ideas on that list that had to do with allyship. That was such a logical and wonderful place to begin. And then we also had a little bit of a conversation about how to expand the influence of the people, for instance, people who are here, the influence of adult ed, which tends to involve many of the same people week after week, and spread that out through the congregation.
Engage more people. Thank you. Judy, your group here?
We believe that anti-racism is a faith issue. It's not just a political issue. It's a faith issue, and we want to express that in active ways. We continue to support the I Am Academy, LAUP, And we need to do more things to get boots on the ground, so to speak, to work with other organizations. And we need to talk about which black leaders are we going to invite to join us and give us ideas about what we can do to put this into practice.
Thanks, Judy.
We talked about some of the biblical stories that have been perpetuating racism and using adult ed to consider some of those and how we have used those to bring a biblical component to the adult ed. And also the nuances to an anti-racism statement that isn't just black people, but what are some of the other kind of people of color in the community that are a little more hidden to some of us, and how is racism perpetuated there, as well as considering the nuances to black worship. Not one simple category fits all black worship either.
Thanks, Cindy. Yep, go ahead, Andy.
As far as some items that resonated with us, we like the idea of reparations being in the action plan, and also, as others have said, being humble, going to other people of color, asking for them what we can do, maybe accepting the fact that we're not a multicultural congregation, we are majority white, and accepting that, but then going to other congregations and asking what we can do to get everyone involved in the conversation.
Thanks, Andy. Dave?
We admit that no one in our group had gotten through a careful reading of the implementation
It's a
statement.
living
so,
document.
We talked about the challenge of being a predominantly white organization that tries to implement various aspects. The idea of, if we are white, should there be a white affinity group that really tries to make us accountable for our whiteness in this community and what impact we can have. Maybe even have to examine some of our somewhat sacred cows.
Judy, how about this group here?
We also agreed about the idea of accountability. How do we make sure we're actually doing this? How do we measure? That was one thing we brought up. Is there be a yearly summary of what we actually did accomplished to measure that? And then we also started to talk about with our budget, which was mentioned earlier, how are we spending our money? Is this an addition? Are we going to shift money around? And maybe every year with the budgetary process, reference back to this of how our budget reflects these, not just this, but all the church priorities, including this one.
Thanks, Peter. We got two more groups yet? Yep. I think that group there, Judy. Hey, Judy. Yep. I think this.
Are
group
we?
here.
Are you?
Yeah, go ahead, Barb.
We also admit we didn't read as thoroughly as we should have the implementation plan. That didn't stop us, though. Sorry. Time, money, and energy is proof of commitment. Next, accountability. I thought that we didn't talk about it, but I personally thought that was a great. How do you measure success in changing the world? That's a tough one. But the other question I had, and I want to thank the technology people for that we can watch this on YouTube all the way on the West Coast. I just want to thank. But the question I had as I was watching the last couple of weeks is, how does this fit in with looking for a third pastor? So I just wanted to throw a monkey wrench, if possible, into the...
Shocking that you would do that, Barbara. Thank you. Is this group here? In the center, I think, Judy? Yep.
We did not really address the third question.
Okay, thanks. Any others? Next, yeah, go ahead, Bob.
So another thing that we in our ignorance talked about was the emphasis on education. We need to educate, because taking this stance is going to make us a target in the community, and that means all of us. And so it's going to raise the possibility that members of this congregation are going to have uncomfortable conversations with strangers. And it's incumbent on us as we take this task to prepare them for those conversations with knowledge and understanding.
Yeah. Education and moving into formation too. How do we hold ourselves spiritually in that? So I think we're kind of moving into discussion here. Jill and I are going to be sneaking out to be getting ready for worship. But is that all right, Ruth? Our chair of the Justice and Reconciliation Ministry, Ruth Stegman. We're very, very appreciative of her.
So I'm Ruth, and when you ask a question or make a comment, could you start with your name? Because I'm still learning names in this congregation. But now we're going to just have open discussion, so anything that you would like to bring up, talk about, feel free. And Pat, you're still taking notes on this, so we'll be documenting all this and then looking at all your responses in the Justice and Reconciliation Ministry. Yes.
Hi, Barbara again. One
Barbara.
thing, and just building on what Bob said, and Janet had mentioned something too really interesting. Somebody asked, when Janet told somebody about something that Hope Church had been doing, and this person said, wow, wish my church was doing that. And I have had personally positive experiences when I bring up a member of Hope Church. I worked on the election and this last time, and when I would casually say I am from here, whatever, Hope Church, always positive.
Great to hear. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Cindy, about to be Debbie Downer for a moment. So one of the questions I raised in our group, and this is a question I've had more generally about when someone chooses to join a group, I think, generally assume they do that in good faith. What if someone chooses to join Hope Church, not in good faith, but to be a disruptor? What do we do with that? Do we have any kind of guidelines for how to address that? And does that mean that they necessarily become members or that they come to worship and disrupt worship? You know, I've been the chair of worship forever and ever, and I've asked this question from time to time, what if we get disruptors in worship? How can we respond? We do have some people who will respond in worship for medical things, but what's the good faith part of being in a community?
Cindy, I wonder about maybe popping our bubble of having all like people in our group and engaging in conversation with people who might be disruptors. And might that be interesting?
So I'm Kristen, and I was a part of the early planning around Hope Church's work on LGBTQ plus issues. And I think a lot of the questions, it seems like some of the questions we're asking, we had ways of addressing that, including the possibility of disruption during ordination of our elder. And really broad ways to do education so that folks who did not want to be speaking with a microphone could be heard in writing. Lots of modalities, lots of options. And so maybe some going back to that history would be helpful in the implementation.
Thanks, Kristen. Hang on just a sec.
I guess in Cindy's comment, I guess I was also Carol. And Cindy's comment about disruptors, but also there are people that are dangerous. I wondered if we had any kind of a security plan or a person that would be part of the congregation. I know we did that at Christ Memorial. They had some kind of security plan because today's world, it's not a good place sometimes. Just a thought.
Yeah, good point. Thank you.
I do appreciate the second paragraph of this statement, which engages in confession. confession of who we have not been when we could have been better than we were. I wanted to respond a bit to the comment last week that we don't understand our history very well. And I would say I, too, have known Hope Church since the 50s. And at Hope Church, well, within the community, we were often known as the Country Club Church. I haven't heard that recently, but it was very prominent back in my college days and even succeeding that. However, I would also say that for a long time, as different social issues have become apparent, that Hope Church has stepped out, and we've done it with working with the migrants. We did it with Head Start. We did it with women in office. We did it with anti-war statements at the time of the Vietnam War, and we did it with LGBTQIA, et cetera. On the other hand, I will still say I appreciate the statement of confession, because I think it says we have not always been who we wanted to be or should have been.
Okay. Thanks for that history, Judy.
I'm Sabella Borchter.
Sorry, first name again is?
Sabella.
Sabella, thank you.
I think this discussion needs to be held with the next generation who live in the community, are still going to schools, who work in the community. Most of us in this room are now retired. So I think it's all right we're doing this discussion, but we've done this for 60 years in the church, in groups, making a statement. I think a good place to really start is with the next generation in our educational classes, talking about what they see in the community and about their responsibility. And ask, they're the one who are going to be doing the action in the next 20 years, not us. So I would encourage you to, in your educational classes, and I don't know how big a youth group you have or anything like that, but that's where we got to challenge and encourage them to make some changes.
Thanks, Sabella. I think we have time for one more comment. I'm okay with silence.
Jane to Jane, yes. Okay, is it on? Okay. Just as I would summarize, being one of the people on the Justice and Reconciliation Committee, along with Ruth, and I just want to compliment Ruth in being an extraordinary chair who looks to the minutia, and I have a feeling you can be assured there will be accountability on this with Ruth leading this. And I also want to encourage anybody who finds this important work, interesting work, to consider joining the Justice and Reconciliation ministry. We really would love to have you. As I listened, it seemed to me that there were a couple of things. One, that there's incredible support in this room for this document, for moving ahead. I think that there's been wisdom expressed in what we've heard today. And I think I hear clearly two things. One, yes, proceed with this. And two, we want accountability and measurability and communication about what is going on in all of our ministries to make sure that we are bringing this into everything, including the budget, but every aspect of what we do.
Thank you, Jane. Okay, to wrap this up then, please, if you were the note taker, turn in your notes. Even if you weren't the note taker and you're willing to share what you wrote down, you don't have to put your name on it or anything, just turn that in so that we have as much detail as we can gather. As I said, the Justice and Reconciliation Ministry is going to take a good amount of time to review your comments, and we'll continue working. And then what's coming up next is that we will be looking for ways to have various Hope Church groups engage with the anti-racist statement and the plan so that we get more input than just from adult ed. We realize that this is a limited group. We're looking at additional adult ed series yet to be determined. And keep in mind that that implementation plan, it's just a draft. It's kind of a messy draft, actually. So don't take that as gospel or this is what's going to happen. That is going to need a lot of work, and we're always open to your input on that implementation plan. So thank you so much for coming. Jane, do you have a final comment?
Yep, thank you. Yes, stay tuned for fall. Yes, thank you very much. Yes, stay tuned for fall of this year, because I can tell you that the rest of this year is planned. Therefore, I can tell you that next week, please join us when Linda Walver-DeVelder will be bringing us a presentation about her children's book, Rosetta, Rosetta, Sit By Me, which is, Rosetta is the daughter of Frederick Douglass, and Linda will be doing a presentation about that next week. So please join us. Yes, and because next week is also the congregational meeting, when all of you are going to enjoy soup and various good things here in this space, that means that adult ed needs to meet in the chapel next week. So when you come in, please just head straight back to the chapel next week. Any other housekeeping? Great. I can give you a small update about Selma. Some of you know Larry and I are headed out the door right now to head down south. And I mentioned Selma last week, and I heard back from the executive director of the Chamber of Commerce in Selma, who gave me some wonderful things, but she said that all the historical sites in Selma are now open, and that the recovery process, of course, will be ongoing as the community works. She also gave me a wonderful list of potential tour guides, some of them who were foot soldiers in the Selma to Montgomery March. So we're looking forward to that.
Could you ask your husband at the end to close us in prayer?
Yes, I can ask him to close us in prayer. That would be great. Thank you all very, very much.
And pray for your own safe travel.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, he's driving.
How wonderful to be volunteered. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you to have gathered us here as a people of God to be a witness in our community, in our world, to the values that you hold. And so we pray as we move forward with this statement of anti-racism that it may indeed make a difference in our lives as well as in the lives of our communities, and may it be a witness for you. We pray for justice in our community. We pray for the welfare of all people, and we pray for your Spirit to abound in grace. Lead us forth as we head towards worship, as we head towards travels, and may your, again, grace abound in our life. May your mercy be a part of our everyday experience, and may we go in your peace. We pray in your name. Amen.